Welcome. You are listening to American Universe with your host, Nico Van Niekerk. Your dreams, lifestyle, and fortunes are in the crosshairs of a very powerful wrecking ball of liberty, and you will lose them if you do nothing. In this hour, Nico Van Niekerk will explain how to preserve our nation's liberties, your liberties. And now, the host of American Universe, Nico Van Niekerk.
My goodness, another week bit the dust and has been cast into the rocks of history. You know, when I hear the word rocks as in rocks of history as I used it, I cannot help but remember when the British called us in South Africa, because they considered us as thick as rocks, you know, between the ears, of course. And that wasn't the first nor the last mistake the British have ever made. I mean, take Piers Morgan, for example. He loudly asks us whether we need automatic rifles in his quest to further embarrass himself about the gun control debate. That need he is talking about is founded in his loyalty to the British aristocracy, who believe they have the right to prescribe to people what they need and do not need in life. Hey, Piers, it's none of your business what I need, okay? If we believe we need something, we'll go and make it or buy it without yours or anyone else's consent. It's always a privilege to be with you this hour, and I've been looking forward to our precious time together. This is Nico Van Niekerk, your benevolent host and Commander-in-Chief of the American Universe on AM 870, The Answer. I watched some of the debates about the budget this week, and I was pleasantly surprised that Paul Ryan actually said that he hopes the Senate would attempt to pass a budget this year. Attempt is the right word because there hasn't been a budget from the administration for several years. One night, Bill O'Reilly had a Democrat town crier on his show on the O'Reilly Factor, and she kept pointing to the budget cuts that the administration has on its budget. She even held a piece of paper up for the audience to see, stating, "It's right here for everybody to see." What O'Reilly missed, asking her, was where is this piece of information published? The answer, of course, is on the White House website. The right way is to submit a budget to Congress, Bill, not publish it on someone's website, and you didn't point that out to her. If it's in Congress, it's on the record, and if it's on the White House website, it's not. On the website, it's subject to change at the administration's discretion. The previous budgets had been voted down in the Democrat-controlled Senate with unanimous rejection. Unanimous, folks. Nobody can be blamed for thinking there was some backroom wheeling and dealing going on to make that happen. That's offensive. What's more troubling is that our conservative leaders would negotiate with themselves. Why did Speaker John Boehner even agree to negotiate with the president the very first time? There was only one budget on the table. John Boehner's budget. He should have walked away every time the administration failed to put a budget of its own on the table. Yeah, that's right. Get up and walk out unceremoniously. Just walk away. The press would have raked him over the coals, but they did that anyway. So it's not clear why our leaders would disregard what's right and wrong for the sake of what? Respect for the office? Well, he could have said that Mr. Obama was present, but the President of the United States didn't show up. He could have said that the de jure president was there, but the de facto president was not. I don't know. I wasn't there. But it doesn't matter what it looks like from where... It does matter what it looks like from where we are sitting, looking in from the outside. I'm just saying. If you're just tuning in, this is American Universe with your host Nico Van Niekerk on AM 870 The Answer. If you've been with us last week, you may remember that I spoke about conservatism and that it has never been correctly defined. You may also remember that I said that I developed the correct definition that shields the concept of conservatism from corruption and redefinition by our adversaries. Because if they could demonize the term conservative, used as a noun, all that's left for them to do is point to our missteps, even the perception of misbehaving, and accusations of hypocrisy appears to be plausible. If those accusations are made often enough, people do not only become suspicious of conservatives as a group, but their perception of conservatives becomes tainted as a people. We are projected as somehow mean, rigid, racist, homophobic, sexist, everything that would serve our adversaries' motives. The word conservative is not the only word that liberals have redefined. They've taken many words as weapons in their quest to marginalize conservatives and undermine their defense against liberalism, which is their obedience to their virtues and values. The other day I spoke with a friend and we talked about this very problem of liberals redefining certain words, such as the word gay. Now, you younger listeners may not know that the word gay was once used to indicate that someone was a happy person and not a homosexual. So I said to my friend, you know, I know you're a happy person, but I also know that you're not gay. And go figure. Liberalism is another word that has been redefined by modern-day liberals. If you look at how liberalism started in the 17th and 18th centuries, you would be quite surprised. John Locke, who is often credited as the founder of liberalism, argued that each man, now listen to this, each man has a natural right to life, liberty, and property, and that government should never violate these rights. Did you hear that, folks? Liberalism actually proposed the right to life, liberty, and property as natural rights. Oh, man, doesn't that sound like conservatism? Sadly, there is nothing left of these attributes in modern-day liberalism, even though they claim those attributes. Their actions show us the direct opposite. So if liberals are not advocating life, liberty, and property rights, and that government must not violate these rights, what are they advocating? Or should we rather ask, which underlying belief do they reflect in their conduct, in what they profess, and how they govern? Don't worry, folks, I'll be asking the same questions about conservatives, so stay with me on this. What's that? No. They cannot claim to advocate the right of life today because they overwhelmingly support abortion. Cases of rape and incest? Yeah, I know. But 93% of all abortions are for social and convenient reasons, not incest and rape. Don't you think it would be more reasonable to first have a debate about the 93%? The more than 1.2 million babies being aborted every year in the United States for the sake of convenience? And once we have solved that problem, then let's talk about the 1% that are caused by incest or rape. Anyway, folks, I don't want to lose my train of thought here. We will do future shows on abortion, and then we'll cover all the angles. You just have to tune in every Sunday at 11 a.m. To do a bit of market research a few years ago, I started asking people to define a conservative. And all I got was a list of attributes and characteristics, such as lower taxes, smaller government, and some even said fascism. So I guess it depends on whom you ask. But that is not a definition. That's a general description of their perception of conservatism. I was looking for a definition. Just the other day, I had the opportunity to sit down and speak with someone from a very esteemed conservative university, and I asked him to define a conservative. And he came pretty close. He defined it by saying that a conservative is one who holds as a basis to certain absolute truths which are permanent, and the conservative conserves them because they are absolute truths that were true in the past, that are true now and will be true in the future, such as God, country, and family. That wasn't bad, and although all these are true statements, defining conservatism in that manner appears as if we claim the moral high ground, which is not the case at all. It rather reflects humility. But liberals are not interested in how things really are. They are only interested in what can be used as a weapon against us to serve the struggle of the moment. From this definition, it is very easy to demonize conservatives. All liberals have to do is point to any suggestion of moral transgression of a conservative and follow that up with a barrage of accusations of hypocrisy. That's it. And any defense we launch against these attacks requires us to fall back onto and highlight our underlying virtues, which just adds fuel to the fire, proving, according to them, that we are radical fundamentalists and even terrorists. The more we claim to hold on to our inalienable rights, the more they ramp up the perception that we are kooks and radical right-wing nutjobs who only want to hold on to our guns and our religion, taking the country back to the 17th century. Well, folks, we have a break coming up. Our sponsors are up next, and I will get to the definition of conservatives when we get back after the break. Don't go away.
And now, back to American Universe with Nico Van Niekerk on AM 870, The Answer.
Welcome back to the American Universe with your host Nico Van Niekerk here on AM 870, The Answer. As promised, folks, in this segment I'll give you the correct definition and breastplate of conservatism, which also solves many riddles in politics, such as being left or right of the political spectrum. So what is this correct definition? Well, here it is. A conservative is someone who is willingly obedient to a universally accessible, clearly defined set of principles, precepts, and understandings. My friend from the university asked whether that was all. And I said, yes, that's all. Sorry, one sentence. But let me explain what it means. Let's call this set of principles, precepts, and understandings a doctrine for the sake of convenience. The key to this definition is twofold. Firstly, it must be a willing obedience. One must freely choose to obey the doctrine, which means studying it to be sure that one wants to adopt it and obey it, and then change one's behavior to honor that obedience. Otherwise, there is no obedience, right? Secondly, the obedience must be something independent, physical, and outside of the individual. That means anyone should be able to read the doctrine and from that arrive at a perception of the image that the doctrine reflects. Willing obedience necessarily means that individuals in their conduct and beliefs would reflect the same image that is found by reading the doctrine. That means one should always strive to reflect the same image that the doctrine reflects and always be willing to refine one's obedience, which will never be 100%, of course. This point is crucial in understanding a conservative. So willing obedience to a doctrine results in an ongoing process of reformation to practice it more accurately. Unlike our adversaries, we admit that we are not a perfect people. So we will refer to the principles, precepts, and understandings of the founding of this nation as the American doctrine. It's evident that using the word conservative as a noun, without a clear understanding what it is that one wants to preserve, lies at the core of the problem. One cannot just throw the word conservative around without this understanding being very clear. As you can see, if we talk about conservatives on this show, I think that a clear understanding exists who we are talking about, so we can use the word conservative without necessarily using it as an adjective. We are, therefore, conservative Americans. Our underlying doctrine is the founding documents. We are willingly obedient to the American doctrine, so if you have an issue with what I am doing, don't blame me. I am merely reflecting to you the image that you and anyone else can go and see in my doctrine. Leave me out of your arguments and accusations. Leave me alone already. If I am of the opinion that I need or want a semi-automatic weapon with a 100-round magazine, for example, there is nothing that you can do to stop me. And if politicians even propose that there should be a limit on my right to do so, they demonstrate that they are not obedient to the American doctrine and are in violation of their oaths of office, which should be a crime from which they have no immunity. Fortunately, we still have the ballot box in the courts, I think, to fix that. The closer I reflect that image, the image of my doctrine, the more honorable I would be. I'm not a fundamentalist in the sense that they put it. I'm not a radical. I'm not a terrorist. Don't look at me. I merely reflect the image of that to which I'm obedient. There it is. Go and read it for yourself, and you will learn how I will behave and why I hold to the position that I do now. If I am willingly obedient to the American doctrine, where am I positioned on the political spectrum? How can there be something nobler to my right or my left, if I already am holding to the most honorable, most noble position on the political spectrum, honesty and obedience to my doctrine? Where is the underlying doctrine of those who urge me to compromise and violate some of the principles of the American doctrine, so that I can objectively sit down and compare their doctrine with mine, and assess willingly whether their doctrine is what I wish to obey instead of mine? Where is their doctrine? What are people implying when they suggest that I should compromise with someone on my left, for example? That I should willingly violate my underlying doctrine and move to a less honorable position on the political spectrum? How is that wise? If I'm willing to sacrifice a bit of the American doctrine here and a bit of the American doctrine there for the sake of peace or to get along, have I not chipped away at the foundation on which peace fully rests? Wouldn't peace be impossible once I have caused structural damage to the underlying doctrine through all the compromises and violations that I have agreed to? There can be no compromise with someone who has no doctrine to which I have the same access that I do to mine. Let's put liberals' doctrine alongside ours and then compare them point by point. But the dirty little secret is that liberals cannot afford that we see their doctrine, which violates the second principle of the definition of a conservative, that the doctrine must be universally accessible and clearly defined. What will we find in their doctrine if they were to show it to us? From their actions, or should I say from the image that they reflect in their conduct, we can determine their doctrine. And it appears as if they are conservative socialists. But that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense at all. Because socialism, which is a precursor to communism, has never really had a hardcore following as wide as we see liberals have today. Something is wrong. It has to be something other than socialism. So let's look at the roots of this nation. And then perhaps a more accurate description would be that modern-day liberals are conservative aristocrats. If we consider their spiritual ancestors who were loyal to the British monarchy and who have been able to preserve their underlying doctrine in a stronghold within the judiciary since 1803, under the brilliant leadership and efforts of Chief Justice John Marshall, an avowed aristocrat, not a socialist. What did Thomas Jefferson mean when he said that the aristocrats retired into the judiciary as a stronghold, and from that battery all the works of republicanism are to be beaten down and destroyed? What did he mean by that? Now, he said federalists, not aristocrats. I added that in there because they were loyal to the British throne, which means they firmly believed in aristocracy. The question with which we will deal extensively in an upcoming show is, how did the spirit of aristocracy survive the American Revolution, which was fought to eradicate any notion of an aristocracy from the American doctrine? And yet here it is today. If you're just tuning in, this is American Universe with your host Nico van Niekerk on AM 870 The Answer. So it is clear that using the word conservative as an adjective solves many puzzles and exposes many myths that would otherwise not be possible if we use the word conservative as a noun. Because we have conservative Christians, and they reflect the image of the Bible, conservative Jews who reflect the image of the Torah, and so on and so on. One person could be a conservative American and a conservative Christian, or a conservative American and someone who isn't really religious at all, or an agnostic, or even an atheist. I urge you to stop any conversation in which the word conservative is used ambiguously, and demand that it be used in context as an adjective, and see how you have thrown a wrench in the works. Usually people who intended to use the word conservative as a pejorative are stunned when they are put on the spot and are compelled to find the correct context by using it as an adjective. It's just one of the many tools we will be giving you to defend yourself against being dragged away by others' evil desires, gleefully watching you cringe at the thought of your own beliefs. My, the second segment is already history, folks. We have a hard break coming up. Stay with us. Don't go away.
And now, back to American Universe with Nico Van Niekerk on AM 870, The Answer.
Welcome back to the American Universe with your host, Nico Van Niekerk, here on AM 870, The Answer. Now, without the correct understanding of the word conservative, exposing liberals as conservative aristocrats rather than socialists would never have been possible. We would still have tried to find the end of the rabbit hole called socialism in their utter amusement of our ineptitude. You conservatives are just dumb, they utter in their chuckles, or they must think that we are a bunch of rocks. Well, that farce is over, folks. We now know how to deal with them. I want to drill down on the Judeo-Christian principles approach. You know that this nation was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. Have you noticed how rapidly some folks throw up the separation of church and state dust if one suggests that the U.S. was founded on Judeo-Christian principles? How many courts have ruled against perfectly legal practices because they would supposedly violate the doctrine of the separation of church and state? So how does that work? Well, it's easy. Nobody has ever required anyone to believe in the Judeo-Christian religion to be able to harvest the fruits of those principles. It's perfectly workable for someone to be a conservative American and an atheist, provided the atheist practices the Judeo-Christian principles on which this nation was founded. Which is why it was troubling that so many folks didn't vote for Mitt Romney, solely because he was a Mormon. His Americanism was without question, which is all that matters. There's one exception, but we'll talk about that in an upcoming show. Romney's religion and his Americanism could quite comfortably exist together in the same office, whether that office is that of President of the United States or dog catcher of Simi Valley. How does an aristocrat benefit from claiming that perfectly legal practices violate the separation of church and state? We only have to look at the roots of this nation to answer that question. The British monarch is head of the church and the state. So it is their profound belief and conviction that the state and the church cannot be separated. So whenever we practice our individual liberties, such as freely praying in school or having the 10 Commandments displayed on our court buildings, they are unable to detect the true separation of church and state, which can be nowhere else but in the separation of our civil and spiritual offices. It's that personal and that intimate. So they are convinced that praying in school or referring to the 10 Commandments in court means that the state is binding itself to the church or to a religion, which is totally false. If we didn't define conservatism correctly, would the real reasons that liberals confuse liberties with the practice of religion have come to light? I doubt that. Thomas Jefferson, back in 1803, recognized what the aristocrats were doing when he accused them of preserving aristocracy in the stronghold of the judiciary. If you're just tuning in, this is American Universe with your host Nico Van Niekerk on AM 870, The Answer. In last week's show, I said that we ought to thank the Lord for allowing President Obama to be elected for 2 terms, because he revealed their underlying doctrine more than any liberal president has ever done before. We should be totally immersed in finding and eliminating all aristocratic thought from our nation by very accurately measuring whether candidates are true Americans, not by what they profess, but by what they do, by the image that they project. That will give us a true insight into their underlying doctrines to which they are obedient. I also paralleled aristocracy with tribalism, and we don't have to look very far or hard to recognize the tribal people already looking to their chief for their daily bread. It's not a secret any longer that the chief is actively rewarding his tribe and punishing those who refuse to live under the yoke of a chief. President means someone who presides, not someone who rules. Chiefs do the latter. Presidents do the former. Too often we hear that politicians held to a conservative position and then caved, giving in to liberal demands. We don't want politicians that will move from the noble to the ignoble, from obedience to the American doctrine to obedience to some other undefined, unavailable doctrine of which nobody has a clear understanding. We must elect politicians who are able to go into the back rooms, where the wheeling and dealing takes place, and secret handshakes tend to steer the ship of state onto courses not before charted, and stay the course when they know we are not looking, because we have not been invited to this party. Stay true to your beliefs, Mr. Politician, or find another line of employment. Well, is this not propagating mob rule, exactly what the Republic style of government intend to avoid? Not at all. I don't propagate that politicians should refer back to the electorate when they need to do their jobs. All I am saying is that they shouldn't lie to us or mislead us to get votes. It must be political suicide to campaign from the right and then govern from the left. Not on election day, but every minute, the very minute that politicians are cheating us and misleading us to get our votes, they should feel the earth shake because of the wrath of the people. If politicians promise to do one thing and thereby acquire votes for it, then they should see to it that they do that. American Universe will provide the instruments by which politicians will be held accountable for their promises and goals, within the four corners of their own undertakings, which we will consider as their absolute truth. They will be held accountable. That is the true spirit of a republic, not a built-in escape hatch to grab and rob votes and then carouse around in obscene opulence and wealth, confiscated from tax-paying working Americans. That will stop now if we practice the correct definition of conservatism. We will be able to hold politicians who wander off their manifest beliefs and promises to their promises by practicing the conservative definition correctly. That concludes our third segment, folks. See you after the break. Don't go away.
And now, back to American Universe with Nico Van Niekerk on AM 870, The Answer.
Welcome back to the American Universe with your host, Nico Van Niekerk, here on AM 870, The Answer. The benefit of correct definition is that we are now able to bring liberals into view with the same measuring rod. Previously, just throwing the word conservative out there already predefined us. Now, as an adjective, we can correctly define liberals too. They are conservative aristocrats, as we've shown, with their roots well grounded in the ancestral beliefs of an aristocracy class, and we as the commoner class. Even if they deny that the measuring rod's accuracy is accurate or its premise is accurate, they can never qualify as conservative Americans, which already is an admission that they are foreigners to this nation, whether their passports say otherwise or not. Only true Americans, those who practice Americanism, can claim authentic citizenship of this nation. We spoke about this in last week's show. Visit our website at www.americanuniverse.net, which is not yet fully rolled out, and claim authentic citizenship of this nation. Sign up and join us if you believe that we are right in our beliefs and convictions. Even if you do not believe like we do, or even if you are a total liberal but don't want your politicians to lie to you, join us, because we are apolitical and would serve you as eagerly as we do any other member. And follow us on Twitter as Liberty Sure, one word. This definition of conservatism does not contain anything that you haven't heard before, folks. I've not invented anything with this definition and explanation. I just lifted the hood so we can look inside where the engine is, so we can better understand how it works and how to manage it. You do all these things all the time in your everyday lives. Think about a club or other social institution of which you are a member. Tennis club, golf club, gym, library, anything. None of these institutions can exist without underlying rules and bylaws, which is nothing other than their underlying doctrines. when you join a club or other social organization, you willingly agree to obey their underlying doctrines. And upon your agreement, you become a member. Through your membership, you enjoy certain privileges and rights, which remain at your disposal as long as you obey the underlying doctrine. And you also assume certain responsibilities, which you need to perform to remain in compliance with the doctrine and your membership. Let's look at an imaginary book club. And let's be really sexist here and say it's a ladies-only book club, which will really rub our adversaries the wrong way, I know. To join the book club, one has to agree to the bylaws and rules of the club. There is the willing obedience part of the definition that already exists. Let's say in the bylaws, the book club requires that the members meet once a week, let's say, and that one lady is nominated every week to give a 30-minute talk about the book of the week. Now, what have we just described here? Something mystical or out of the ordinary? No, we described an underlying doctrine of our ladies-only book club. We described a willingness to join the club and to be accepted into the club, and to accomplish that, one must agree to abide by the rules and bylaws. In the bylaws, there will also be disciplinary measures, such as expulsion from the club of those members who are repeated offenders of the underlying doctrine. Anyone accusing a member of doing something doesn't attach to her personally, provided she can defend herself by pointing to the doctrine and showing that her conduct is authorized within the doctrine, within the club's constitution, as if she says, "Don't blame me, take your case to the doctrine." Conservative Americans should do the same thing, and not get into the ring with our adversaries, but merely point to our underlying doctrine, the U.S. founding principles, and invite them to take their case to the Constitution. If my obedience to the American doctrine is honorable and makes me a true American, because everybody who knows that I am willingly obedient to this doctrine also knows how I will act and what I will pursue, then, as I have said earlier, there is nothing more honorable to my left or to my right on the political spectrum. There can be nothing nobler to my left or my right if I already adopted the most noble and most honorable position. By removing myself from the equation, by making myself, let's say, transparent, as merely the reflector of the image of my underlying doctrine, how would my accusers escape the charge that they are in reality attacking my underlying doctrine instead of me? They cannot escape that, which means they cannot demonize conservative Americans who understand this principle. If you're just tuning in, this is American Universe with your host Nico Van Niekerk on AM 870 The Answer. Let's assume there are times when I'm not accurately reflecting the image of my underlying doctrine. I welcome the reproof of anyone, even liberals, if they are able to point to instances where I legitimately failed. It gives me the opportunity to refine my behavior and realign my understanding of my doctrine, if my accusers are correct, of course. Isn't that what makes us Americans? Or are we just people with certain labels on our passports? Capitalism is also a doctrine that describes what it is and how people should engage in it. Capitalism's underlying doctrine is honorable, compassionate, and rewarding, and liberating. Reflecting an image that is contrary to capitalism's underlying doctrine is not a variation of capitalism. It's not capitalism at all, unless one practices it according to the precepts and understanding of the doctrine. As you can see, folks, this show has been designed to be different from merely pointing to liberals and telling them where they are wrong, and then praise conservatives without testing their motives. We are looking at all people who are in positions of power and who are engaged in policy making, and then we are going to measure, objectively of course, whether what they are saying and doing are in the interest of the people who depend on their judgment, and whether they are keeping to their promises to the people. We are now in a position to accurately measure those whom we put in power against their underlying doctrine. which they swore to uphold, defend, and protect. We must have the instruments by which we can remove from office those who violate that oath. American Universe will provide the electorate with those instruments without seeking legal precedent or an amendment to the Constitution. We will do it within the four corners of existing law. Use your imagination for a moment and think about the time in the history of this nation when brother took up arms against brother, when this nation's very soul was cast into the furnace of affliction. We need to avoid that scenario from developing at all costs. And we need you to join us now while we are able to do this within the four corners of the law and the Constitution. Go to www.americanuniverse.net and sign up. In a sense, we are at the same critical point in history as the founders were when they pledged their lives, property, and sacred honor for this cause. And just look what they have achieved. The founders had to invent this recipe from scratch. All that is required of us is to get informed and get involved to secure the future of this nation and of the world. American Universe is that vehicle, and we need you now, today, not later. American Universe is not in conflict with other conservative initiatives in the country. American Universe is the vehicle with which all talent, skills, and experience of all conservative movements are moved towards the solution. American Universe will be the executor of the will of the people, if you will. We will deal with that in much greater detail later in the following shows. Well, folks, that's the end of our show this week. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for tolerating me in your radio. You can go to our website again at americanuniverse.net and listen to the podcast of last week's show and this show at your leisure. Join us also on Twitter as Liberty Sure. Well, everybody, climb aboard the Battle Tank of Liberty again next Sunday at 11 a.m. right here on AM 870 The Answer, where you will hear the pure and unadulterated voice of reason and truth, where the fog of liberal thought immediately clears up, where the dust of underhand dealings and secret handshakes settle right away, where we regularly look under the hood of issues and see for ourselves how things work. Next week will be packed with so much to do, and there is so little time. Have a great week. See you on Sunday.
You've been listening to American Universe with your host, Nico Van Niekerk, on AM 870, The Answer. Tune in again next week, Sunday at 11 a.m., for more thought-provoking questions and insight from Nico Van Niekerk here on American Universe.